2,000 years ago, on the banks of the Tiber River, a city was born that would grow into one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. Rome was not merely a military giant, it was an economic powerhouse, fueled by ambition, conquest, and trade. Every victory in battle brought more than territory, it brought treasure, gold, silver, grain, and slaves. The spoils of war flowed into the city like a mighty river, transforming Rome into a magnet for merchants, artisans, and laborers. Its silver coin, the denarius, became a form of global currency, accepted across the Mediterranean, from the deserts of Egypt to the forests of Gaul. Merchants carried exotic spices, silk, and fine wines, while farmers sent grain to feed the swelling urban population. Wealth funded monumental architecture, the Colosseum, aqueducts, and sprawling temples, symbols of Rome's ambition and ingenuity. Roads stretched like arteries across mountains and rivers, connecting distant provinces and enabling trade, communication, and military mobility. But wealth brought its own challenges. Rome became increasingly dependent on conquest to sustain its economy. As expansion slowed, the flow of gold and silver diminished, while the demands of a growing population and army only increased. Taxes rose, small farmers were forced off their lands, and wealthy elites amassed massive estates worked by enslaved labor. Cities grew crowded, with the poor reliant on government grain and the spectacle of gladiatorial games to survive. To fund the state, emperors began debasing coins, mixing precious metals with cheaper alloys. At first, this was unnoticed, but gradually prices rose, merchants demanded more for the same goods, and trust in money began to crumble. Trade, once the lifeblood of the empire, faltered as piracy and raids disrupted shipping routes. Provinces became harder to govern, and corruption spread among tax collectors and officials. Rome's military, once the symbol of invincibility, suffered from unpaid legions and declining discipline. Efforts to reform the economy, like Diocletian's price edicts and tax restructuring, slowed the decline but could not reverse it. Over time, inflation, inequality, and public distrust created a fragile economic foundation. Rome's society also shifted under the weight of wealth and decline. The elite lived in lavish palaces, indulging in luxury while ordinary citizens struggled. Social mobility diminished, the gap between rich and poor widened, and political instability increased. Generals often became emperors through force, further destabilizing governance. The empire's eventual collapse was a long process, accelerated by economic decay, over-reliance on slave labor, military overspending, and administrative inefficiency. When barbarian armies finally breached Rome's borders, the city fell not because of a single battle, but because centuries of economic and political mismanagement had weakened it from within. Rome's story serves as a profound warning for all civilizations, ancient and modern alike. The same forces that fueled its extraordinary rise, wealth, innovation, and ambition, also planted the seeds of its eventual decline. Money built Rome's aqueducts, roads, bridges, and monumental structures that still inspire awe today. It funded legions, trade networks, and cultural achievements that spanned continents. Yet, when mismanagement, greed, and inequality took hold, the very wealth that had created the empire began to destabilize it. Inflation eroded the value of currency, debased coins reduced public trust, and over-reliance on conquest for resources created an unsustainable economy. The rich grew richer, while ordinary citizens struggled to survive on dwindling resources and grain handouts. Political corruption and administrative inefficiency compounded the problem, weakening institutions that had once held the empire together. The consequences of these failures were profound. Cities once thriving with commerce and culture fell into decay. Trade routes collapsed under piracy, invasions, and neglect. The army, once the backbone of Rome's power, suffered from unpaid soldiers and declining discipline, leaving the empire vulnerable to external attacks. Barbarian invasions, which may have seemed sudden, were in reality the final blow to a system already weakened from within. Rome's decline teaches us that prosperity without responsibility is fragile, and that unchecked ambition and inequality can corrode even the greatest of civilizations. From Rome's mistakes, modern society can learn several critical values. Fiscal responsibility is essential. Managing wealth carefully and avoiding overextension prevents economic collapse. Social fairness and equity are vital. When the gap between the wealthy and ordinary citizens becomes too wide, societal stability is threatened. Trust and integrity in institutions, including money, government, and trade, are foundational. Without them, the entire system can crumble. Sustainable growth, rather than reliance on short-term conquest or exploitation, ensures long-term stability. Finally, the rule of law and transparent governance are necessary to prevent corruption and maintain public confidence. Rome's story is a reminder that every civilization, no matter how powerful, is vulnerable if it ignores these lessons. The empire spent centuries building wealth and influence, yet in the end, the very tools that created its greatness, money, ambition, and human ingenuity, contributed to its downfall when misused. In today's world, with rising debt, inflation, inequality, and economic instability, these lessons remain strikingly relevant. True prosperity is not measured solely by wealth, but by the wisdom, fairness, and foresight with which a society manages its resources. Money built Rome, but misuse, mismanagement, and moral neglect broke it, leaving a cautionary tale etched forever into history.